we start? Oh, we're still staging. It is. Okay. So I'm gonna start introducing you. Okay. Sure. Adrian can come. He does. We're 2 minutes to the hour. So, before I read Neil's bio and his introduction, I just want to say again how excited I am to have you here. How excited I was to be able to invite you here. This is something we talked about in Sweden.
Yeah.
And I said, you're coming to my conference and you'll be the keynote.
Yeah.
So I'm really happy that this is happening and that we were able to secure money to be the perfect speaker for this particular topic. And you've helped so many students like myself with your website throughout the years. And then that was turned into a book and so on. But I'm from the time when the website was very basic. And I loved it, and it really helped me so much with the vision. I couldn't have gotten anything, but this was before Meg's edition. This was before everything. And you have been doing this for such a long time. So I'm really, really happy to have you here. So, Mann has written extensively on Yeats's esoteric interests and the vision, with articles in the Yeats Annual and the International Yeats Studies. He created the website, the one I just mentioned, YeatsVision.com in 2002, and edited collections of essays with Matthew Gibson and Claire Nally, Yeats's Vision, Explications and Contests that came out of Clemson in 2012, and with Matthew Gibson, Yeats, Philosophy and the Occult, also with Clemson, out in 2016. This book, A Reader's Guide to Yeats' Vision, in Clemson, came out in 2019. With Chapman, he is bringing out a series of essays on the Rapallo notebooks in the Yeats International Yeats Studies. These have been coming out with subsequent editions of the Yeats journal. Based in Finland, he works as an editor and translator. He's been studying a vision for more than 40 years, and it still bewilders and fascinates him in almost equal measures. So, Mann, thank you for coming.
Thank you very much. And my first thing must be to thank Rita and all of the helping people, and of course the university. UFOP, it's easy. Exactly, UFOP for everything, for being such a wonderful host. It's been a wonderful experience so far, and we've only just begun. I want to talk to you this evening about the communion of the living and the dead, or at least Yeats's conception of it, as well as his view of the human being's spiritual makeup. When I told some Brazilian friend back in Finland that I was going to be talking here a little bit about Yeats, of course they didn't really know who Yeats was, and what I was going to be talking about, they immediately said, "Oh, this is the perfect place. This site is where Francisco Xavier, the famous..." Now, if you don't know about Francisco Xavier, he wrote over 500, well, almost 500 books as a medium, and they were also dictated. And so over a lifetime of about 70, 80 years, he managed to write all these books. Yeats, it took him 20 years to get together one is 2 editions. So I think he's sort of rather envied Francisco Xavier's skill and fluency in that sense. But like movement, he believed, and this is fundamental, in reincarnation. We've been talking about what he did and maybe and didn't believe. I mean, as close as you can say anybody believes in anything, he believed in reincarnation, but there's far more within a theosophical and therefore, in that sense, it's had a more Indian, a more Eastern framework rather than the Christian one. But tonight we were going to conjure Yeats. This is the theme of the conference, and so therefore we have here our bottle of Muscatel and glass. I mean, we will wait for a little time to open it, but we're going to do it. We're going to join Peter in Oxford, but this time in the imagination. But we're going to go back a century. We're going to go back to 1920 on a dark November night as the strokes of midnight die. Midnight has come and the great Christchurch bell and many a lesser bell sound through the room. And it is All Souls Night. And two long glasses brimmed with muscatel bubble upon the table. A ghost may come, for it is a ghost's right, his element is so fine, yet being sharpened by his death, to drink from the wine breath, while our gross palates drink from the whole wine. The three spirits he calls upon, William Horton, Florence Emery Farr, and MacGregor Mathers, all dead friends. Love is a strange thought, and even if we know nothing of their lives as readers, we can see that the poem's speaker selects those who would share his interest in the marvelous thing that he has to say. He's engaged in conjuring, and in the sense of he's both conjuring them as he's invoking them as a spirit, he's also conjuring them into a collaboration. He wants them to work with him because he needs help. He needs the help of spirit's mind that's able to stay wound in mind's pondering, wound in mind's wandering later on. With the glasses here, I hope to conjure a little help from the dead myself, to explain something of Yeats' spiritual worldview. Yeats, like MacGregor Mathers, was a ghost lover. And like Mathers, therefore, he may have grown more arrogant being a ghost. And in fact, though he loved, apparently, buttonholing people at the Kildare Street Club at various places to tell them about his lunar philosophy, there's a wonderful account by Burton Smiley of he's completely upside down as to, the new moon is where full beauty comes and so on. And Thomas Carlyle is the worst person ever who have lived and so on. And it's all sort of all mixed up. But obviously, Yeats had buttonholed him. He had regaled the company with this kind of story. However, it doesn't matter actually if Yeats comes or not, because names are nothing. This is the first clue. In fact, spirits lose their identity gradually as they carry on in our life. And so there is actually less and less identity as time goes on. And so I hope to show that, in fact, in his own thinking, it would actually be impossible to call on Yeats' spirit, or for him to call on the MacGregor Mathers spirit or Florence Farr in the real terms. Of course, as a metaphor, it carries on having strength. It's the simplest way of saying the thing. When we read or hear the poem All Souls Night, what do we as listeners make of the scenario? Do we genuinely think that Yeats is calling upon a spirit, or are we T.S. Eliot thinking it's just a pose, thinking that it's some kind of, what was the phrase, tentative palliative or something like that, or some temporary palliative to revivify the pulse of the dying patient? Is it some minor mythology, or did he believe it? Now, those of you who've looked at Rob Doggett's interviews with various people about the Yeats poetry will know that Adrian was the selected victim for All Souls Night. And again, as he said earlier on this morning, he actually said he doesn't believe in ghosts, but he still loves the poem. How can that be? How can you love a poem but not actually really engage with the fundamental idea that's in it? Part of the reason, part of the way we can do it is because, of course, All Souls Night uses a framework, uses ideas that are shared by all societies across the world. It's something that atavistically, ancestrally, we've all of our societies have built upon. The idea that with gifts of food and incense, sparkling wine, or in fact, sometimes rum, of course, in Santeria, and so on, spirits for spirits. These gifts can actually feed, bring connection with the spirits. So what then is this marvelous thing that Yeats has to say that the living might mock? We're never told actually in the poem. We're told that it's held tight until meditation will master all its parts, but it's almost as if he keeps it tucked into his self. And if we'd seen it when it first came out in the New Republic, there's no clue. This poem appears on its own, naked. Or if we saw it in the London Mercury, same thing. It's completely without context. So he says he's going to tell a marvelous truth, but there's no marvelous truth there. Same thing when it came out in 7 Poems and Fragments from Kula, but 4 or 5 years later, it came out, of course, as the final part of book 4 of A Vision, not the epilogue. Later on, it became the epilogue to A Vision. But at this stage, it's part 3. Part 1 is The Fool by the Roadside. Part 2 is the 16 sections on the afterlife. Part 3 is All Souls Night. So it's specifically within the framework of The Gates of Pluto, the section devoted to the dead. Now, I don't know whether Yeats had always planned All Souls Night for this position, but he'd always thought that it would be the ideal poem. But obviously, he had been thinking about how he would give context to these thoughts and how these various ideas would come into his way of expressing the ideas about the afterlife. So, according to the date that he puts there, you can't see it because it's at the end of the poem, but he puts there Oxford, autumn 1920. And given that date, it's actually not surprising that he was in the mood now to be communicating, to be telling. Just parenthetically, Jung, a couple of years earlier, had also published 7 Sermons to the Dead. So this idea of speaking to the dead was not actually only Yeats, it was something in the air. But up until March 1920, the Yeats had been engaged in these sessions of automatic script. So they had been solidly, for two and a half years almost, having evening sessions where they would read, where George would answer the questions by letting her hand run free. But then they'd taken up the idea of sleeps, trance-like states in which George would talk about what the spirits were communicating, and therefore things were carrying on. But Yeats was already now at a stage that he really wanted to get this thing formulated, to get this thing expressed as a system. When he wrote in 1920, the also like Florence Farr was one of the people, and this is a note that he wrote to himself from about somewhere between 1922 and 1925. There are dates on either side of this in the manuscript book. I will try. I just thought I'd show you. Yeats's handwriting is not easy. There's nothing. There's one word here I still can't get. He says, "In dedication of A Vision, why not commend or dedicate book to old students in the quest, living and dead? Florence Farr, for instance, something out the dead hear and see us." I don't know what that word is. If anybody has a brilliant insight, let me know. It's something like setting out or explaining how the dead hear and see us. In the end, though, he dedicated the book to Moyna Mathers, a living person, a living member like Florence Farr, like MacGregor Mathers of the Golden Dawn, students of the quest. This idea that he has the quest for truth. And he's addressed her by saying, "We all, so far as I can remember, differed from ordinary students of philosophy or religion through our belief that truth cannot be discovered, but may be revealed. That if a man do not lose faith, if you go through certain preparations, revelation will find him at the fitting moment." The key word here is revelation. This is what he was expecting, this is what he wanted. He was not going to get it by studying, he was not going to get it by accumulating information. There would be a moment of revelation. And he's indicating that finally this revelation has found him, although it may be too late. It says, I had what I needed, though it may be too late. He admits also that it is nothing new. What I've found is indeed nothing new. And at the same, or earlier on, he'd been writing about art and artistic practice. He saw the artistic practice to be a centaur. You have the human part, the intellect, but the centaur is the back, the strong back quarters of the common shared popular heritage. And so the art is a centaur. I think the exact phrase is, yes, finding in the popular law its back and its strong legs. Similarly, when he was talking about the teachings of the Golden Dawn, he says that it was full of a fantasy that has been handed down for generations. Is now an interpretation, now an enlargement of the folklore of the villages. In other words, the complicated panoply, if any of you have ever studied it, it's full of symbols, planets, correspondences, and so on. He's saying this is just really an interpretation or an enlargement of the folklore of the villages. It goes back to something that is shared by the common people, not just this elite of educated, in the case of the Golden Dawn, mainly British mages and so on. He says the fantasy did not explain the world to our intellect, which were, after all, very modern, but it records certain forgotten methods of meditation, and chiefly how so to suspend the will that the mind became automatic, a possible vehicle for spiritual beings. So here the first clue, the revelation comes through other beings. The revelation is not separate, it's not facts, it is not something, it's revelation comes through spiritual beings, through living forms. And in fact, also what we find in the mind of the Indian and Japanese poets, old women in court, mediums in Soho, lay brothers whom I imagine dreaming in some medieval monastery the dreams of their village. Again, back to the common shared, what we would nowadays call the collective unconscious. And again, Yeats uses the phrase, what we've begun to call the subconscious. It's not exactly the same, but it's very similar in this case. Thus, he's going back to the dreams of the village, the authority of antiquity. Modern world has nothing that is necessarily more authentic. If something is genuinely authentic, it will have antiquity, it will have ancient roots. And in order to understand what was coming to them through this automatic writing, through the trances, the Yeatses were told, and they did, they engaged in forms of meditation. And meditation is not what we tend to think of nowadays, when we think of transcendental meditation, clearing your mind and so on. But then that would be called contemplation. Whereas for them, meditation was selecting a target, a fixed idea, often something, for instance, like a tarot card or a symbol or some form of a concept, and then focusing the mind, but importantly, letting secondary things come. Because what happens is that when you set a theme for meditation, they told me to pay a special attention to the secondary images, because through these spirits communicate. So the idea is that spirits, in fact, are communicating to you through images. And another thing, we are subconscious to the dead and they to the living. They enter our world through images and we into theirs through abstract contemplation. So that's one way we can enter through this transcendental form of contemplation, but they come to us through images. So Yeats, at this date, was living in Oxford, and as well as the Christ Church Bell, he also had All Souls Chapel. All Souls Chapel, he never went at service time, but that is where he sought out parts of vision. The reason he's going to All Souls Chapel, of course, is the architecture, it's the beauty and the aura of the place. It's also, though, this is the College of All Souls of the Faithful Departed. This is the All Souls of the Dead. So it's not just All Souls Night, it's also All Souls. Again, it's not the famous saints, it's not the special stars, it's the normal, everyday community of saints, the communion of the living and the dead. Now, the there's one point he has. Michael Robarts has a point where he says, "I have no doubt that Custer Ben Nuki, don't worry about that, but this is a fictional form of the revelation, or as I think more likely some Syrian philosopher long before his time received his doctrine by that revelation, or at any rate by what Sir Thomas Browne has called the courteous communication of spirits." This idea he takes from Thomas Browne is that there is some way in which spirits have helped us. And in fact, the fuller quotation, the more accurate quotation, is something that he used in his essay, Swedenborg, Mediums and Desolate Places, which was intended as an introduction to Lady Gregory's I forget now, the West of Ireland, visions and things, the West of Ireland. I do think, wrote Sir Thomas Browne, that many mysteries ascribed to our own invention have been the courteous revelations of spirits, for those noble essences in heaven bear a friendly regard unto their fellow creatures upon earth. And in Yeats's own interpretation through Michael Robarts, doubtless spiritual beings who help our lesser intelligence have put into current symbolism a psychology understood by them without its help. So the spirits therefore have turned it into his version of the automatic script. So this explains therefore why Yeats is summoning the dead in order to help him unravel or to tie up. It's difficult to know which he wants to do, these mummy truths, these idea of winding himself into thought. So the spirit is telling them, but he also wants to hear from them. He never quite explains why he calls the book a vision. A vision, what is it? What is he trying to say? And there are two basic reasons here, and I'm going to be very quick, but one of them is that vision is what we call a true dream. A vision is something that if you have a dream, but it comes true or it has some truth in it, is called a vision. Those of you, we just come from Brasilia, and we are told that St. Don Bosco, dreamt of South America back at the end of the 19th century, and one of his dreams was that there would be a great city between the 15th and the 20th parallels. This vision has come true as the city of Brasilia, and so on. So this idea, therefore, this is what distinguishes a dream from a vision. Second reason is perhaps more important. This comes back to the title of what I was saying, is that art, or in this case, a vision, is a vision of reality. It's a way of seeing things, not necessarily the truth. It's not necessarily a photograph. It's a way of seeing. It's a way of interpreting and creating things for the mind to understand it better. We just had Custer Ben Nuki here. He also invented a secondary form of fiction, which was of a 16th century European. And there's a story about a book which has been torn to pieces and mutilated. Little bits of it remain. And this is called the Speculum Angelorum et Hominum. This is the supposed frontispiece of this, the great wheel from the Speculorum Angelorum et Hominum. Angelorum of angels, et hominum of men. So the mirror of angels and men. But in many ways, it is like this black obsidian mirror that Dr. Dee used, or in fact, Dr. Dee's medium, Edward Kelly, used to look at the angels. And the diagrams that came out of that black mirror are, if anything, even more complicated than Yeats's. It's one of the, I think, it's one of the biggest treasures in the British Museum. There were many other things. It's a little bit looted in as far as it's of Aztec origin, but it's less looted than some of the other stuff. So anyway, so the mirror is an abstract diagram of the real world. It represents it to a purpose. And he wrote himself a brief note in one of his journals. And again, here's Yeats's handwriting. It's not only made more complicated by being on a slant, but he has two people here, Heek and Ille. So Heek is saying, why do you waste your time with such abstract studies which can have no effect on life? Become practical, and you may lay your hand upon the helm of ship of state. This is what I was talking with Matthew about earlier, being a statesman. Ille, though, counters. So the ship crosses the world, the helmsman never takes sight from a disc covered with letters and lines, perhaps some 18 inches across. This idea, therefore, that the helmsman looks at an abstract version of reality, not the reality, not look at the ocean, doesn't look at the headings, he looks at the compass, he looks at the charts and so on. And the speculum or mirror, therefore, is like this. It reflects a particular vision of human beings, but in particular from the perspective of the angels. Angels, however, in Yeats' term, are daimons. These are slightly more ambiguous figures than what we would normally understand by the form of angels. Heraclitus uses the word daimon to be basically destiny or fate. Homer uses daimon for Pallas Athene and also for the spirits of heroes. Plato has the priestess Diotima in the Symposium refer to love, eros, as a great daimon. The daimon is a form of spirit. You could even see it in certain Brazilian terms as an orisha, and so on. But the daimons, therefore, in this case, are individual. Every single person has their own daimon. There are also groups. There are group diamonds of the Yeats Society, no doubt, or certainly diamonds of Yeats scholars and so on, and all of these things. So the daimons, therefore, are kind of spiritual beings. Those of you who are aware of Golden Dawn practices might see these collective daimons as egregores, these collective spirits that are semi-created, semi-independent. I'm not going to go into the daimon as much as I should, because it is key, and yet it's the form that evolves the most. It changes between 1920 and 1935, quite significantly and quite radically. So I'm going to be slightly cheating on this, because otherwise I would bore you even more. Key thing, it starts off basically as a form of antagonist, a form of anti-self. And as he develops his idea, he begins to see it really as the archetype of the whole human being. Now, currently I'm incarnated as me, but all the rest of me, i.e. the contrasting complement, is in the daimon. And so therefore, it's a kind of antagonist. It's all that is not what I currently am. So from that point of view, therefore, the daimon is still an antagonist, but it is a form of completeness as well. And so, but if you go to look at the introduction to the words upon the window pane, this is where he compares it with Leibniz's monad, the idea that this is a kind of center of meaning. He also compares it, and this is a key metaphor, with the stage manager. We are dramatizations of the daimon. And he compares it in particular with the Commedia dell'arte, a licentiary drama, where you are given the role of Harlequin, Columbine, Pantaloon, or whomever. You are given a situation, then you have to go out and play it. You have to improvise. And then occasionally you'll get sort of crises thrown in, so that you have to respond to those. And the daimon basically is watching you. Unfortunately, I'm afraid the daimon prefers tragedy to comedy. So therefore, the daimons are constantly trying to sort of make things a little bit more intense, a little bit more passionate. And he actually says they don't care whether you are Juliet at her wedding or Cleopatra at her death. Those of you who think a little bit more, Juliet's wedding is not the happiest of things. So he's not, even his positive example is actually fairly negative. Now, he does call the daimon in one of his loves the chief person of my drama. And if I skim things a little bit on the daimon, Yeats is even worse. He definitely does not give you enough information about it. there's plenty in the drafts. I don't fully understand why he decided in the end to take them all out. One clue does come in the paragraph that he wrote, where he said to his instructors, "Will I ever understand the diamond?" And the instructor said, "Not while you're alive." So therefore, we will come back to that. But I'm going to make a couple of comments and caveats. First of all, I can see already a few furrowed brows. I recognize that I've been dealing with this for so long that sometimes I forget that it's difficult to take on all of this information in one go. And I apologize for that. I hope, therefore, I try and leave enough time for questions so that anything that isn't clear can be filled in. Secondly, I know that my title was Yeats's Worldview. This is a very, very tiny part of Yeats's worldview. Anybody who wanted culture or politics or Irish worldviews, no, I'm afraid it's going to be basically ghosts and spirits and so on. Then another point is that it's ideas to develop, things to develop, and the thing I'm going to focus on now, the principles, is something that emerges relatively late. It isn't very strong in Edition A, the version that came out in 1925. It is only part of Edition B. Again, I don't quite know how he didn't do a better job. Read it until book 2. Most people by that stage have got fatigue. There's so much terminology, there's so much of the stuff that most people actually really don't bother taking it on. So Graham Huff, when he wrote his rather wonderful book, W B Yeats, decided to take all of this stuff out because he's decided that it really was just too much. I mean, I know you can't read it, but this is the page where he's saying that he finds most of these definitions are hopelessly fussy and superfluous, but indispensable. He says, you know, these dismissals are fairly extensive. It's about a third of a vision that he gets rid of, are possibly mistaken and quite likely impertinent. I risk them because I feel strongly that if the more cluttered and ill-arranged apartments are simply shut off, the chance of satisfactory progress through the rest of the edifice are greatly increased. So what I'm going to do is quite the same, but I'm going to basically try and point out, I'm going to hold your hand a little bit, and try and point out the points of interest in the clutter. So I recognize there is clutter, but I'm going to try and point this out. And I'm going to use a symbol of my own creation. This has got nothing to do with Yeats. It's purely a useful mnemonic. I can see it before, but I find it a useful mnemonic. And I'm going back to John Dee. It's this sort of basic idea of this hieroglyphic monad. It's a way of putting ideas into a little symbol. So we start off, therefore, with the key and main point, which is that everything is spirits and spirits. From God at the top to the material that is for here, everything is spirits. Now, I don't know necessarily that Yeats fully believed that every stone, every tree is spirit. However, that's what he says in his more theoretical moments. And therefore, we start off with spirit, and some of these spirits choose to become human beings, or are forced to become human beings, or just become human beings. Don't know exactly why. And the idea, first of all, is that we have the entity, which is the celestial body, and then spirit. You have to use the word spirit for spirit. This is actually what, in the poem dialogue of Death and Soul, what we would call the soul, in fact. So it's slightly confusing that you've got the word spirit and soul, but here, this is the monad. This is the central being. And gradually, in order to take on experience, it acquires a shade or a soul. Now, if you look at the Dreaming of the Bones, Yeats uses the word shade what in fact in his system. Elsewhere, he uses the theosophical term, the astral body, and so on. So this is the emotional and feeling part. And then, in order to connect with the natural world, we have this sort of matrix, this point or something, which is the husk. This is the natural point. And then the husk connects to the four faculties. So the faculties are things that are acquired in order to be able to interface with reality, to interface with the physical world. And Yeats explains the principles in one place by comparing them with an old Buddhist preacher. Sorry, uses some Buddhist preacher of the 1st or 2nd century to describe the mind in relation to the body as a lame man upon a blind man's back. That metaphor must have been Christian as well as Buddhist for the people in my Galway neighbours, of my Galway neighbours, say that our holy well was discovered by a lame man who had seen himself, a blind man, cured at the same spot. So this is a draft, so there are words missing. I should have added them. Anyway, we found it, put it on the blog. I turned the story into a little comedy called The Changes of the Moon. I can't even remember the title of his own play, but this is, of course, The Cat and the Moon. Picturing it as in some obscure and grotesque tapestry, the dependence of spirit and celestial body, the known and the known, on the husk and the passionate body, the is and the ought. And then that's the crossed out bit, and change that to the will, husk and passionate body. So that's this part here, and thought, spirit and celestial body. So we have therefore this idea that we have also the solar part and the lunar part, but I'm not going to go into that today. So one of the key things, though, is that when we are in normal waking life, the principles are almost in abeyance. They're not really active. They're only there in dream or in trance or something like that. And so we might as well actually put the faculties on top and the principles underneath or down below. But this is the whole point, that for Yeats, the subconscious or the unconscious is not necessarily below. It's as much above as it is below. It's around. It's not actually anywhere. So this idea of repressing subconscious or forms like that is not relevant. It's a bit like a philosophical approach. The idea is borrowed from Hinduism, borrowed from Buddhism. But in Hinduism or Buddhism, and even in theosophy, the point is to get out, it's to get liberation, get nirvana or satori, or some form of liberation. Yeats not quite so clear that he actually wants this, and this is what I'm going to focus on for the last part. We know, of course, the famous poem Mohini Chatterjee, and this is its first printing as part of a packet that is a pound. And asked if I thought, if I should pray, but the Brahmin said, pray for nothing. Say every night in bed, I have been a king, I've been a slave, nor is there anything, fool, rascal, knave, that I have not been. Yet upon my breast, myriad heads have lain. So the idea that our purpose in life is to acquire different experience. We have the king and slave, fool, rascal, knave, all of these forms. And then another metaphor that he uses, we've had the one, the beggar of the blind man upon the lame man's back. Another one that he uses is of a lover spirit who's torn between two lovers. Beauty on the one hand, the world on the other hand. Beauty is tempting him away into life, into incarnation, while truth is pulling him back or pulling him towards her. And yet beauty and truth are sisters. So the point is that although they are both forms of antagonistic, they are united. They have this common form. Um, I'm going to skip a little bit because I think I'm getting slightly behind myself. Just to say that at death, what happens is that, like a lunar rocket, start shedding the stages, so that you have the first stage of you get rid of the faculty at death. The next stage, you get rid of the husk. The next stage, finally, you get rid of the passionate body, until all you have left is the command module, the lunar module of the original two of spirit and celestial body. And then once you're at that stage, which is the beatitude, the middle of the afterlife, if you have completed your mission, if you've completed all the experience that you can get, then you can escape. But you're not going to, because you have to go around the wheel, 28 phases here. Now, you may repeat some, you may skip some, but it's going to average out at about 28. And you've got to do that 12 times. So there hasn't really been enough time for that. So there's not many people who've done it. There may be a few, but there's not many. So if you don't go out of the wheel, you're going to come back in. Uses these metaphors taken from the Neoplatonists, the cave of the nymphs by Porphyry, where he talks about the honey of generation, which uses in among school children. The honey of generation is going to call you back, or the cup of oblivion, the cup of forgetfulness. One of the things we need to remember is that the dead are in almost permanent dream state. They are not really conscious in our sense of the word. So the dead are coming into our dreams, but they are themselves dreaming. And so therefore, it's very, very difficult. The dead have emotions while they are still in the early stages, but they do not have any facts, they do not have any memories. And so they need to come to people in their family, in their circle, in order to try to find the facts that they need in order to try and sort out the conundrums of their life, the things that have made their life and that they need to resolve and to try to get rid of. But we've also got, amongst all these other spirits, we've got the dead, we've got these discarded shades and husks at the bottom. We have spirits, which these are the ones that are in some senses freed. We have the phases of people, the incarnations, these special incarnations in Yeats, you do not incarnate as a human being. At the new moon and the full moon, you incarnate as separate. Again, I'm not going to go into that for the moment. Then we go up to teaching spirits. These are helping you in your afterlife. And finally, at the top of the thing, you have daimons. But we also have their collective equivalents. So we have the collective of the daimons. Effectively, actually, the collective of the daimons ends up being God. So if we can see the collective of the daimons right, if we can see it as a unified whole, then it is God. It is what Yeats refers to as the ultimate reality. We're surrounded, therefore, by this cloud of witnesses in the parade of St. Paul, this communion of the living and the dead. And yet, Yeats says then, okay, when the dead, all ghosts controlled, communicators, visualizations, poltergeists, apparitions, instructors, like these are the people that are helping him to live in, are personifications, dramatizations of what would otherwise remain unknown. Whenever I speak of spirits having form or voice, it must be understood that such dramatizations are implied. These spirits are not spirits, they're dramatizations. They're dramatizations that come from two places. They come from, on the one hand, the medium, the person who is somehow projecting them, and on the other hand, the daimons. Spirits in between may exist, but not always. However, of course, when Yeats is writing literature, he's not going to talk about the daimon of Dermot and Deborgilla. He has the ghosts of Dermot and Deborgilla appearing in the Dreaming of the Bones. And he compares the things. Let's skip that one. He compares the book, the structures that he's had. He says that this book would be different if it had not come from those who claim to have died many times, not those who have died many times, those who claim to have died many times. And in all they say assume their own existence, not that they exist, but they assume their own existence. I mean, I think I assume my own existence, but again, it's almost a kind of twisted thing. In this, it resembles nothing of philosophy from the time of Descartes, but much that is ancient. So from that point of view, therefore, is again going back to this idea of the ancient, the antique, something that is from the world of antiquity. And this is the same thing here. This book would be different and so on. And this is in fact inserted ahead of a thing about I begin with the daimon. So again, the whole thing is all connected. The spirits are maybe provisional. The daimon is real. The daimon is what is really important. So going to very strange and rather weird passage that comes in the diary of 1930. My instructors once puzzled me by insisting that when I read Keats's Ode to a Grecian Urn, I was in contact with the still living mind of Keats and not with my own thought. It seems to be certain that we may not, that we may be not only be one in God, but one in some small or large group, some conjuriums lasting for many years or created and resolved in a moment, these collectives, these things. The great poets and artists as creators remain in the group, which being universal cannot be resolved. Then death cannot separate them from it, because it can only remove what is particular. Okay, that's great. Then comes one of these weird ideas. But what if Keats be at this moment a sheep farmer in Australia? He incarnated, and for some reason, I don't know why, a sheep farmer in Australia seemed to him the thing that he might have gone on to. This raises the difficult problem of the division of consciousness, the contrast of Keats the creator and Keats the son of a livery stable proprietor. So we have the Keats the creator and Keats the person born in a particular date and in a particular place. And in a way, this actually will be leading us at the end to the idea that we have Yeats the creator and Yeats the particular man born in Ireland at the end of the 19th century. So I'm just going to finish with a brief thought about the dialogue of self and soul, which we have referred to earlier today. It comes from a period when Yeats was most intensely engaged in trying to work out the principles. It's written about 1927, and Yeats is trying to sort of rethink and try to work out the spiritual aspects of his system. Now, you don't need to know anything about it to understand what's going on to a certain extent. Just like you don't actually need to know that he was given a samurai sword and that samurai sword was wrapped in a lady's embroidered sleeve, or that he genuinely did actually have a tower in the west of Ireland. These things we know, probably most people who are here, we know that they actually did exist, that they were there, but it doesn't matter either. He could have created a complete fiction, as he does with Michael Robarts, as he does with Christopher Looker, and so on. All of these things are unimportant. But in contrast with All Souls Night, Yeats here in this poem does not want to let the mind wandering. He says, think of ancestral night that can, if but imagination scorn the earth and intellect its wandering, deliver for the crime of death and birth. So here he's trying to say, I do not want to let myself be trapped in mind wandering. I want to transcend it. The poem closes, or it starts off as a dialogue between self and soul. Self on the one hand, trying to counter what soul says. We've got one person with two parts, and so self is trying to argue for the virtues of incarnation. This is like the lower stages of the lunar rocket, trying to say, yes, we must, keep this full form, while soul is arguing that it must try to transcend, try to escape, try to go to what is dark, try to go to the proper dark. And then he decides that I am content to live it all again. He said that he's content to live the crime, so to live the crime. And yet again, it would be life to pitch into the frog spawn of a blind man's ditch. We have this brilliantly squelchy image of being incarnate, the frog spawn of a blind man's ditch. It's also, of course, we're back here with the fact that the blind man is the physical body. The lame man is being carried by the blind man, so the blind man is the physical body. And in a similar way, at the end of the dedication of a Vision A, Yeats is on the island of Capri in February, and he tells Moina Mathers, I murmured as I have countless times. I've been part of it always, and there is maybe no escape. Forgetting and returning, like life after life, like an insect in the roots of the grass, but murmured it without terror, in exultation or love. Must admit, for many years, my mental picture of that was some kind of cricket or grasshopper in the grass. If you actually think about it, though, he's saying insects in the roots of the grass. He's thinking about a little grub or larva. He's not thinking about a cricket. He's not thinking about something. So again, he's actually saying, I renounce my wings. I am willing to stay as a larva. I'm willing to stay in the frog spawn and so on. Again, all of the larval stages of life. So at the end of the second version of a vision, Yeats puts forward a question. Shall we follow the image of Heracles that walks through the darkness, bow in hand, or mount that other Heracles, man not image, he that has his bride Hebe, the daughter of Zeus the Almighty, and Hera shod with gold? Earlier in a vision, he's compared the shade, the passionate body, to the image of Heracles that Odysseus sees in the underworld of Hades. And then he says, but that, of course, is not the real spirit. The real spirit of Hercules or Heracles is on Olympus, and that is what is the real, true person. This implies that he thinks that we should go with spirit. It implies that we should go up to Olympus. That's the opposite of what he's saying in the dedication to Moina Mathers. It's the opposite of what he's saying in Dialogue of Self and Soul. So we're back to this idea of these dichotomy or contradiction. When we are looking at all this, of course, most of us are willing or forced to take it as metaphor. And one of Yeats's strengths here is that one of the definitions of the occult is rejected knowledge. It's the discarded image of reality, as C.S. Lewis called it. And so it's something that is there, and that even though we no longer think that alchemy can do what it wanted to, or divination, astrology, or the various different forms of magic, these are regarded as rejected by modern minds and so on. We still understand them, we still find them useful, we still find them useful as metaphors. And so from that point of view, we can enter into the poem, we can enter into its frame. I will return to the bottle of Muscatel. I'm afraid that if we pour out the glass, Yeats' spirit cannot come, at least according to his own definition. However, if we read the poem All Souls Night, then yes, we can ascend to the spirit. We can maybe make contact with the daimonic. And so in that sense, actually, it's just a very long and complicated way of saying, yes, we should read the poetry, enjoy it, and not worry too much about the actual definitions and the actual. Thank you very much.
Do it.
Well, I mean, as I say, I mean, the whole point is that we can do it if you want. But let's wait. I mean, it's any questions. As I say, I realize I'm rushing through, and I have seen quite a few thorough brows. If there's anything I can in any way elucidate, I'll be very happy to, or just nab me afterwards, and I can answer any individual questions. Yeah. But I don't know. It is and it isn't. It's one of the things about it is that it is surprisingly separate from tarot, surprisingly separate from astrology, surprisingly separate from many of these things. If you try to make the connections, and quite a lot of astrologers and tarot people do try to make the connections, they get into even bigger problems than the literary critics who want to try and ignore it. So from that point of view, I don't think it's syncretic of these things. That said, one of the people who was relatively sympathetic towards Yeats' occult interest was this doctor called Frank Pierce Stone. And he said, some dead Babylonian mathematicoi have got hold of your wife, and they are trying to revive some outmoded and ancient system. He says, there is no petrol for this, as he actually says. This is not going to work. So even people like that could see that it was something slightly ancient, slightly old-fashioned way of expressing the ideas. But as I said, surprisingly, it's slightly separate. The one bit that is very similar is the bit that I was going through here. It's very similar to theosophy. It's similar to traditional yoga, the fourfold division of the vehicle and the principle of the soul. There are other divisions. Ragini will be able to tell you far better than I. In sort of different forms of the of traditional Indian schools. But Vedanta, for instance, does not generally have this kind of division. Yoga does, but it is at least very, very traditional. And so this part is the part that is, I think, more readily comprehensible, and in a way, it makes more sense. Even if, again, at the end of the day, I would say partly you can treat it as metaphor if you want to, or you can go into a little bit more deeply and say, what is the knower and the known, the is and the ought, in a dialogue of self and soul.
Yeah, thanks for that. So much. Like the quick the title at the beginning. There's so many metaphors. Actually, metaphors there. Of course, there's this famous sentence.
Yeah.
And operating.
Yeah.
In a way, it starts with the spirits themselves are wow, woven in the metaphors. And struck me out a whole book could have been for metaphors.
It could be, exactly.
It wouldn't be such a good selling point.
It would certainly have sold better with literary critics, I think.
It's actually a linguistic church. Two sort of small things. There was a fascinating passage with the insect. What about this insect, the reincarnation and everything?
Yeah.
Hypomus,
yes.
Characters.
He dwindled into a flea.
Yeah,
sort of
never dies.
never dies. I think in this sense, I mean, it's almost the opposite. That this sense, you are the grub, and so on. And in that sense, by being incarnated into the frog sport of the blind man's ditch, you're in this grub stage. If and when you were to achieve liberation, you would become the butterfly. You would become the imago. So from that point of view, I think it's the opposite of Tithonus, because Tithonus in a way starts off as a beautiful young being and then ages into I can't remember what it turns into. Is it the Fiora cricket or?
But one other piece. I was wondering when you talk about Sailor's Sword.
Yeah. No, I didn't say.
I was very forgotten. I thought it's. I mean, this is one of the great things about Yeats. Imperial symbol.
Well, this is exactly. But I mean, he goes through the exact details. Monteschigi forged it, and so on, and the third of his name. He goes through all these details. Doesn't matter if he got it wrong. Doesn't matter if he had created Monteschigi. When you go, for instance, to Desert Geometry, or The Gift of Harun al-Rashid, you know that is a fiction, and you can feel that it's a fiction. Here, you know, well, if you know about it, you know that this is true, and you can feel that it's true. But does it actually matter that there's a difference between those two? I'm questioning.
Well, no. Yeah, it's true about it. He didn't exist. I don't think Yeats would make any effect.
No. Yeah, and I think the other thing also is that yes, if you do know about Sato's Sword, and if you do know about the Tower, it does somehow make the poem better. It does make it more interesting. It does actually add to it. I would say that from the other point of view, if you know a little bit about what he means by the soul in terms of the darkness, the pole star, and all of these things, that again, it informs the poem. It gives you a little bit more. So in some ways, neither of them is essential to understanding the poem, but both of them enhance it when you know them. Sorry, Adrian.
Well, thank you. I think that was a marvelous thing to say. So.